Well, good evening, Instagram. My name is Matt Hogg. It is a pleasure to see you this evening. This is Monday Night Lives. I am a vicar in the Church of England and based in West London. Been hosting these conversations over the last 11 weeks. This is episode 11. Can you believe? It's been an absolute pleasure to connect with a bunch of people over the weeks, and I'm really excited about who we have on this evening. Good evening, Max. Great to see you and others as they join as well. I put out a poll in the last week to find out what people thought about this moment in time. People thought 92% of people that responded said that this is a cultural tipping point, and it is a significant moment indeed in our history and in our culture. And I don't know how you got on at church yesterday. We certainly had a really, really powerful and moving service yesterday, hearing from different voices under this heading of racial justice and harrowing, courageous, just unbelievable conversations that have begun and that we need to have and that we need to be open to. And we as a church are on that movement, and you can watch our service actually facebook.com/St Albans Fulham, and I shared some thoughts, but we also heard from other voices as well, all in the context of worship, and that's where it has to begin. So anyway, really, really good to see you. Thanks for coming this evening and joining in. I see a few people have joined already. Tonight we have chats with a couple of people. One is an old friend, someone that I've known for a while. His name's Graham. We're going to chat with him first. He's a vicar in East London. And then a new friend, Martrell Harris from the States. I'm really excited to connect with him as well, and looking forward to that. So first though, we're going to add in Graham and we're going to chat with him. We're going to find out about church life. We're going to find out about digital and also how they've been responding as well as a church in these days. So look, here we go. We're going to embark on this conversation. So let's see if we have Graham joining in. Hello, Graham.
Hey, Matt. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks. Very well. Nice to see you. This is a very red room.
Hey, well, yeah, that's...
It's a library.
They say you can learn a lot about a person by the colours they paint. Apparently, people who paint their rooms green like peaceful, kind of meditative things, and they're very peaceful and harmonious. And people with deep reds are kind of passionate and moody. But I don't know. I'm not sure I claim that anymore. Or I stuck with it.
Oh, no, it's great to see you, Graham. Thanks for being here this evening and chatting. I'd love to just tell us a little bit, for those who don't know you, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and where you're based.
Great, thanks so much. Well, so my name's Graham, and I'm vicar of St John's, Hoxton, which is a church in East London. I've taken a tip from you, Matt, and carefully sculpted a screen behind me. So that might, I don't know if that'll be not how that's come out on people. But anyway,
I can see.
Yeah, I think you've got to have a screen behind you. Yeah, I've been here coming up to 10 years as vicar. My hometown is Bristol. Bristol has been in the news a lot the last 24 hours, so that's interesting to kind of reflect. Age of 18. In early life, I had expected to go into acting or the arts, and I wasn't raised in a Christian family. I was raised in a very kind of politically active left-wing Marxist atheist family, so I was like a little Richard Dawkins protege, and I suppose an early Corbynista, you might say. And then I came to Jesus when I was 14 years old through a local church, and really good youth work in a local church and schools work. And when I was 17, I felt God call me to become a vicar, which was weird. That was a kind of no idea what that meant. But for me, at least, starting out with youth work and worship. So I left Bristol, ended up in Watford, where I was part of a church, Soul Survival Watford, for some years, getting involved in youth work and worship, and then moved into London to take a role as a youth and worship pastor, actually one of the earliest of the HTB church plants. So if anyone has come across the HTB church family, I was at a church in Westbourne Park, just sort of near Paddington for a while. That led to meeting my wife, Sarah, marrying, going to train for ordination at Ridley Hall in Cambridge, coming back to London into the Stepney area, so Islington, and now in the corner of Hackney, where I've spent the last 10 years. I've got 3 kids. It's my daughter's birthday today. They're next door watching Frozen 2 at the moment. All you need.
Well, that's great, Graham. Well, look, we won't keep you too much longer from Frozen 2. I know you'll want to be getting over there. Just wanted to ask, what do you think the lasting impact of the pandemic will have on your church, on the church in the UK?
Yeah, really interesting question. I think it's too early to tell. I'm cautious about the language of cultural tipping points. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
1989 we thought was a big cultural tipping point. 2001 we thought the world had changed forever. 2008 we thought we could never go back. But I guess one of the things that history teaches us is that the principalities and the powers, although ultimately defeated by Jesus, are remarkably resilient in this age. And I read somewhere the other day of the theologian Marcus Borg put it this way in a sermon. He said that Western culture is sort of infatuated with the 3 A's, and his A's were appearance, affluence, and achievement. And I think those things have still got a lot of grip on culture, on people's lives, appearance, affluence, and achievement. And I hope that this moment will challenge that, and there will be some better stories to tell. But I'm not mega confident that it will completely change our culture. I think it will be an accelerator. Some people watching this will know of the leadership consultant Kerry Newhoff, Canadian, and he talks about this as a cultural accelerator. And for the church, that probably means that big churches are going to get bigger, small churches are going to get smaller. Network gathered churches will have an even bigger and multinational reach, and hopefully, and I'm praying this, that local churches will become hyper local and become even more connected in their local neighborhoods than ever before.
It's a great insight there, Graham. Really wonderful insight into what potential future of the church could look like. Yeah, really interesting. Okay, so lockdown is easing a little bit here. Love to know, what have you been learning during lockdown? Have you read any good books during lockdown? You mentioned a theologian there.
I mean, we're very much a neighborhood church, so and my kids are at school locally. They're all school age, so we spend a lot of time in the neighborhood anyway. But lockdown has been really interesting. Going into it, we had just come off the back of, like many people, really being influenced by John Mark Comer's book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. I had a study leave sabbatical break last autumn, and I came back with 3 words for our church. I felt like the Lord had said, here are 3 words for St. John's Hopson in 2020, and they were rest, relate, and renew. And the logic behind it was that if we can get rest right in our lives, if we can learn how to do Sabbath and get rhythms of life good, and we can learn to relate well together, to become more connected, more engaged and involved in each other's lives, then actually that we will undergo a spiritual renewal individually and corporately. And it was really interesting. I learned very quickly at the beginning of this year, as everything started kicking into gear again. It's all very well to say, but life takes over and you get busy. And lockdown almost forced us into rest. It forced us to find new ways of relating. We couldn't just open the doors and wait for people to show up. There was much more intentionality about forming groups, telephoning people, reaching out to people. So that was, but then I've also learned and recognized that busyness is an internal state, not just an external circumstance. And that actually busyness originates in the heart. And if we are anxious and frenetic and insecure, we will hurry our lives, seeking meaning, purpose, all those things Marcus Borg talked about, our appearance, our affluence, our achievements. So the discipline, I suppose, is to try and slow down and keep resting during lockdown. 3 books. You mentioned the books. So I'm reading, like a number of people, I'm reading Hilary Mantel, The Mirror and the Light. Where am I? There's my bookmark. So it's a long slog, but to get into the mindset and the life of Thomas Cromwell, to think about society in the 16th century, to look at their sweating sickness and their struggles with pandemics and illnesses, but also to see them wrestling with reform, with trying to be faithful to God's word, to scripture, to a new revelation, a new understanding of scripture, and how that would influence and reform society, and then battling with the powers that, you know, wrestle for a place in that, and of course the powers that influence our interpretation of scripture. Brilliant book by Wendell Berry, stand by me. Wendell Berry is an essayist, poet and novelist, and this is a collection of stories. They're extraordinarily moving, and he's really, it's very interesting actually. Wendell Berry, he's probably like my shadow side in a Jungian sense, because he's not exactly anti-technology, but he's skeptical. He's got a whole essay in one of his books of essays called "Why I'm Not Going to Buy a Computer," and he's really committed to cherishing and honoring creation and the rhythms of the created order that God has ordained, and not making that all, so being good stewards and not simply subjecting creation to our own advantage. So that's a great read. And then of course I'm reading, we've got a collection of books that we're looking at around racial justice at the moment, and I've just started reading Ben Lindsay's book, We Need to Talk About Race. So we'll talk about that again in a bit.
Wow, Graham, that's fantastic, just to get a little insight into what you've been reading and chewing on in this time. Wonderful. Okay, so think about digital. You've been a real pioneer with this in your church, and just this is something that I know has fired you up over the years, and I know you've been thinking about lots. And tell us what you were the first mover when it came to live streaming. This is not what we're doing now, is not new to you. You were there on Periscope amongst the first one, and what was your experience of that? What was it like being sort of amongst the first to explore that?
I think it's really interesting. I mean, I'm not a techie, but I like tech. I'm interested, and I suppose I was an early adopter. When I moved here, Hoxton's a really fascinating neighbourhood. Many people don't really know it is, but it's right on the border of Shoreditch. And when I arrived here in 2010, there was a lot of buzz around Tech City, Old Street Roundabout, Silicon Shoreditch, and you know, being quite at home with tech anyway, and quite liking learning and experimenting, I was keen to be available to engage. Not really anything more than that. I didn't have a massive agenda, but with a couple of friends, we formed a little group called Tech City Christians, and we were, I mean, the guys at Kingdom Code do brilliant stuff around harnessing tech for mission, but our role, we felt, was different. It was just to do sort of some gentle Christian witness and chaplaincy within the tech community. And partly that was because, again, there is a shadow side to all this. You know, we got these stats out about Tech City and digital startups, and the vast majority of that was built around a guy in a laptop in a coffee shop registering a business and printing off some business cards that said they were chief exec and CTO, CEO, CFO, and never having turnover, never having profit. George Osborne heralded all these new businesses, and I was like, it doesn't really mean anything. And actually there's a lot, actually it became almost something that catalyzed hope and despair. You know, it distilled that kind of people coming with the Dick Whittington effect, looking for the streets paved with silicon to make their fortune. But the vast majority was struggling, and we just wanted to be there to say there's a bigger story and a better story, and it's not all about that. But yeah, we broadcast our Christmas Day service on Periscope for the Church of England about 5 years ago. So long before it was a regular weekly fixture, we had to go.
Well, I've heard you say that before, Graham. Where was it? Just for anyone that else was on Periscope could watch it, or did you screen it? Did it stream to a channel as well somewhere?
Periscope was linked to Twitter, so I think it was, but it was its own app. I think it's still on my phone, but probably offloaded to the cloud now. And we experimented with, we did some stuff on Facebook Live quite early on. I was always quite confident in front of camera doing this kind of thing, going live, being quite impromptu, thinking on my feet. But I did also realize that I wasn't always very considerate about other people's needs and how people accessed it. And I think I recognized that sometimes I rushed into the kind of live streaming digital space without thinking about people who need a bit more time to reflect, who need, and we had some issues we had to consider about the safety of children and adopted children and looked after children, congregation. We also recognized that with some of this, and you know this, I'm a hesitant social media user now because I've seen a lot of the sort of social disinhibitor effect of social media. I read a report some years ago that suggested that being on social media was like drinking 8 pints of beer and then having a conversation. It's sort of, people actually sometimes act out of the worst features of their character, not the best. Yeah. And so we need to be a bit careful about that.
Well, okay. And so, I mean, you've had a live streamed Christmas service to the Church of England through Periscope a number of years back, and you have been a first mover and a pioneer when it comes to using digital in the church context for mission and ministry. I'd love to know, have you got any, I don't know, any encouraging stories or any stories of fruit or signs of God at work through digital, through all those, through all that engagement and involvement that you've pioneered?
I don't know. I hope that we are a credible conversation partner with people contemporary and local to us. I don't think of us as a pioneer in any way. We've been available and we've had some opportunities to host hackathons. There have been two little things, I suppose, which helped me just in, I've had the opportunity to, in our church building, host some hackathons, have like 400 or 500 people in the church doing kind of 24, 48-hour sprint style meetups. We had the BBC Microbit launched at our church, which was great. And I get the privilege of getting to stand up from time to time and say a few words. And I like to point to that passage in Hebrews, I'm going to say Hebrews 11, but I've probably got the wrong verse. It's towards the end of the chapter where the writer talks about God being the architect of the city that was to come. And I like to point out that an architect is simply the chief techie. It's the CTO. But the point is that God is designing and building something better and beyond what we currently see. So trying to let tech be driven in the service of a better world, a better tomorrow, a better future for people. And that also means being really attentive to those who are marginalized and excluded. We follow God, who is father of the orphan, protector of widows, friend of the poor. And the world of digital is not always that, and we're experiencing this at the moment in our neighborhood.
And there's the phrase that's been used, banded around a little bit, digital divide, and there's something of that you're referring to.
Oh, right? Yeah. So, we've got a lot of families in overcrowded housing. So it's exacerbating or amplifying contexts and situations which are always difficult. So if you're in environment of deprivation at the moment, you're probably experiencing it more keenly and severely than you were before. So those families in overcrowded houses tend not to have the home internet and the devices that enable everybody to be kind of in their own little, or the space for everybody to be there homeschooling and doing their work. I've bumped in the street locally, I've bumped into members of our congregation who, of course, because they're poor, don't have the kind of all-you-can-eat data packages that I have. I mean, I pay for an unlimited data package, so I can do all this stuff on 4G. But actually, if you can only afford £5 a month, it doesn't get you very much data. Poor people don't have home internet; they don't have home broadband very often because that requires line rental subscriptions, equipment. People don't have laptops, and there's a generational divide as well. So we have older members of our neighbourhood who. They may have a computer, but it might be 15 years old and not really fit for purpose anymore. And we have people without anything. So we're working at the moment, I'm in a meeting later this week to try and work with business and with government about getting data-enabled tablets and managed services into the hands of people who are currently kind of being left behind. Many schools have had like these Chromebook setups where they have like managed services. And it shouldn't be beyond the ken of man or woman, beyond the ken of any of us to try and figure out those kind of systems and bridge the digital divide. And we're looking at working with a partner to try and get some new high-speed broadband Wi-Fi connections for our neighborhood. So we're trying to make our church gardens a kind of super fast Wi-Fi zone, so that people can come, enjoy the greenery and do their stuff.
That's amazing, Graham. Absolutely amazing. One more question on digital. Just love to know what's your, as a church, and for you even personally, what's your vision when it comes to using social media and digital?
Hmm.
You mentioned earlier, sorry, you mentioned earlier about a conversation partner. I guess there's some of that, isn't there?
Yeah, so I think that I think one of the phrases that's come to my mind a few times recently is URL to IRL. You know, moving from the digital into the in real life, and I think that's because I want to take really seriously the doctrine of creation, the incarnation, the resurrection, the physicality of the world that God has made for us, and that's not to diminish the very real. You know, there's sometimes a divide between like virtual and real, and I think you can have a real relationship formed online. But I think that we mustn't lose the kind of connectedness and the intimacy of the face-to-face. I think our strategy is to try and let digital be a driver of the hyperlocal. We work very closely with Citizens UK. We're very involved in community organising, and our vision is to be really, you know, a mid-sized local neighbourhood church, very strongly focused around a kind of geographical neighbourhood of Hoxton, not kind of gathered, not network, you know, hyperlocal and diverse. And so the digital strategy, I suppose, is to try and help people, you know, get the inside to the outside by going online, and then help people connect. A lovely little moment where neighbours across the street, when we're out doing our clap for carers, our neighbours across the street who we've never spoken to before, of course, managed to identify that we live in a vicarage, and then Google the church and then email me to reach out and connect. But it's how do we kind of take that the next step, you know, beyond this time. It is, of course, easier to invite people than it's ever been. So we're getting lots of people locally just dropping in casually, which has been great.
That digital to physical, I think, is one of the big questions that churches, certainly that we've been talking with over these couple of months. You're trying to figure out how do we bring people and move people from digital to physical eventually. So I think I was listening to talk. I think it's a guy called Clay Scroggins in a recent conference talked about click to community, and also an interesting reflection about dating. That you know, majority of people, a lot of people now, you know, meeting online, dating apps, but it's always with the intention of meeting for over, you know, face to face over dinner.
I almost certainly am going to get into trouble for saying this because I get told off by my staff team for it all the time. But I've had this long-term fantasy of putting the church onto Tinder. I want to like create a profile for John Hoxton and like, you know, characteristic, you know, passionate about social justice, hate culture, taste, characteristics, love my, you know, ethical trade, living wage, and just see who swipes left and who swipes right.
Oh no.
One other thing about the click and the connection, I mean, I think the digital to physical is really important, but I'm learning a lot about how, you know, I was worried for a while that by streaming services online too much, one of the reasons we stopped streaming actually was I was worried that it might make people passive consumers and in a way make it easier for people not to attend church. But I've come to realize more recently that actually something different is happening. People who have really kind of real and genuine reasons that physically attending is becoming is difficult for them are now able to join in online and engage. And the big question is, how do you switch from attendance to engagement? And we're doing that a lot through use of kind of the comment threads, chat, you know, trying to follow up comments with phone calls and all that kind of stuff. But we've had a handful of people who have returned to our church community, having been rehoused, relocated. We said a week before lockdown began, we said goodbye to and commissioned one of our members who was appointed to become country director for Save the Children in Rwanda. And her and her family were on the last flight out before Rwanda closed their borders, actually. The next plane got turned around midair and sent back, but they made it there. And we kind of prayed for them, and we commissioned them, and we sent them out. We were so delighted. We were saying kind of farewell. And she was kind of standing down as a Connect group leader. And the next week, the kids were at kids group and online, and she was leading the Connect group again. So, you know, some of that's great, and I'm quite happy about it.
Interesting. Okay, Graham, we're slightly running out of time, but you referred earlier on about racial justice and this cultural moment and questioning, is this a tipping point? I'd love to know just more practically, how has your church been responding to this moment? over the last couple of weeks and thinking about the coming weeks as well.
Thanks, Matt. Well, I mean, yeah. So our church is multi-ethnic, multinational, multicultural, multi-generational, and we're very intentional about that. We've taken Galatians 3:28 as a real kind of guiding value for us about, you know, I sometimes joke we have leave voters and remain voters in our congregation. We're really that diverse. So in a sense, we've been tackling this from the point of view of leadership development, listing, developing cultural competencies with one another for quite a few years. So that's been a really kind of good thing. My wife and I made a little statement last week, which we just felt we needed to say something. We didn't want silence to be complicit with anything, but we equally didn't want to kind of, you know, be overwhelmed by some of the kind of social media stuff. We just wanted to kind of put something out there. But actually for us, it is about listening and about conversation partners. So we're very involved in, as I mentioned, community organising work with Citizens UK, and the bedrock of that is listening, one-to-one conversations, listening, learning people's story, hearing people's experience, and then working on where the issues are, the problems are, and what action you can take. So we're going into a season of having various little conversation groups with, you know, people from very mixed and diverse cultural backgrounds, mixed ethnicities, mixed generations, mixed cultures. And we hope that we'll be able to share and make some of those conversations open with our church community, but we're doing that also beyond the church community. So that's about listening in our neighborhood, connecting with, you know, other local organizations, mutual aid groups, other kind of voluntary associations, and being involved in that. And one of the things I think is so key to this, I think it was, I think it's Eugene Peterson who said, or it might be a Dallas Willard who said, you know, one of those greats, to be listened to is almost indistinguishable from being loved. And I suppose that's the key for us at the moment, is to take time to listen, a sign of love. One of the first couple of years of Jesus's life on earth were just listening. It's quite a mind thought. Before the pre-existing word of God spoke a word, he listened to acquire language and meaning from those around him. And I think, you know, we need to be humble and hospitable and open to that.
Yeah, great. What a treat to spend some time with you. Thank you for giving up some time. And
great to see you.
It's been a pleasure to pick your brains and hear what you guys are doing on the ground over in East London. And thank you for sharing your experience and practical wisdom as well.
I'm really humbled that you'd have me here, and I think what you're doing, Matt, with these, bringing on a variety of different people, I found really engaging and really interesting. So thank you so much for hosting this.
Oh, Graham. Oh, no, absolute pleasure. No, it's great to see you. Thanks again, Graham. Great stuff. There was a little question actually earlier on. Art Galleria girl, have you connected with Hoxton Mutual Aid? We were able to gather and distribute a load of laptops in Wimbledon through this team work. Maybe connect with them later on. But two
connected with both the mutual aid groups locally. But yeah,
brilliant. Nice one, Graham. Have a good evening. See you soon.
Great to see you. Take care.
All right, guys. So I'm just going to check. I'm going to finish this live, and then I'm coming back on with our next guest, Montreal Harris. So I'm really excited about this. Just want to double check a couple of things, but don't go too far. Come back in a moment. I'm going to end this, and then we're coming back on again.